Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Political. Today, we're going to be talking about Wisconsin and revealing to you the legal loophole that allowed 250,000 people to vote without voter ID, a loophole that was exploited by the Democrats to great effect. This is in the news because last night, Katie McEnany brought attention to Wisconsin legislators attempting to change the recount law to prevent Republicans from addressing this loophole. Guess what? Failed. And now we have a case that could potentially go to the Supreme Court. It's a very interesting episode for you today. As ever, you know that if you're a long-time viewer, but if you are new here, welcome, welcome, welcome. Do please consider subscribing if you haven't already. And thank you so much to everyone who's done so already, because we've just hit 300 subscribers, and that's massive for us. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And as always, do remember to leave a like, tell us your opinion down below. We love to hear from you. So, Yayan, could you please explain to our wonderful, amazing viewers just what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, you need to strap yourselves in for this one because there's a few details that you need to know. So just very quickly, look, here's the election map. We spoke about how does Trump win. He needs the three closest states, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin. That would bring it to a tie. That's the easiest way to do it. And we talked a couple of days back, how can he win Wisconsin? Well, the Wisconsin law says that you can file for a recount as long as you pay for it. And that would have cost $8 million. Trump's campaign said, well, actually, we think that the votes that we want to find are in Dane County and Milwaukee County. So here's $3 million, just we're going to recount those counties. You would think that would be fairly simple, but it's not. They've pushed back against this and they've not wanted it to go ahead as it should have done. So I just want to explain a couple of things. First, in Wisconsin, the law is any qualified elector, so anyone who's obviously eligible to vote, can register for and request an absentee ballot. Anyone can do that under Wisconsin law. You will need to provide a copy of your acceptable photo ID with your request. If you have not previously provided a copy, then one must come with your first application. Here's the important bit. Voters who are indefinitely confined due to age, illness, infirmity or disability may request that the ballot be automatically sent to them for each election. Indefinitely confined voters do not need to provide photo ID with their absentee ballot request. So this is a kind of loophole around not getting voter ID. That's what you need to know. But under certain circumstance, if you're basically disabled and you can't get out of the house. This is just before the election, so the 29th of October. Here's what happened just before the election. So election officials across Wisconsin have been shocked by the number of voters claiming to be indefinitely confined in the run-up to the election next month. Since spring, in April, another 50,000 voters have registered as indefinitely confined. That's an increase of 26%. The total number of indefinitely confined voters in Wisconsin now stands at 240,000. Last year, the total number was only 72,000, an increase of 238%. Those voters enjoy a special perk. They're exempt from voter ID law. Starting in May, local clerks bombarded the Wisconsin Election Commission with questions about verifying these voters' claims. How can they make sure these voters aren't just trying to get around the law? The WEC told clerks they are under no obligation to confirm voters' indefinitely confined status. If they want to try, they should do so using discretion and respect to voters' privacy regarding their medical and disability status. However, even if clerks are able to confirm a voter is not indefinitely confined, there's really nothing they can do about it. All changes to status must be made in writing and by the voter's request. Since the number of indefinitely confined voters has soared, every county in the state has seen a significant increase. And I just want to show this bit as well. So in Milwaukee, it went from 42 to 53. In Dane County, 19 to 24. Dane County Clerk Scott McDonald even took it upon himself to declare all voters in the county were indefinitely confined. After he did that, the Legislative Reference Bureau quickly explained that anyone who falsely claiming to be indefinitely confined is breaking the law. So the Democrats actively encourage their voters to sign up this way to skimp around the voter ID laws. But why is this important to the recount? Because the recount did require, and still does require, that you can access the applications for the ballots, and that's part of the recount. But the Democrats didn't want that to happen. So the WEC has agreed to issue an order to recount ballots in the two counties that Trump's requested. he's going to pay the $3 million. And what was expected to be a pro forma move, but took 6 hours for the commission, split along party lines, was to agree to that recount. And the reason why is because the Democrats wanted to change the way in which the recount is done. So the recounts in Milwaukee and Dane County, where Joe Biden outpolled Trump by more than 2-1 margin, will begin Friday and must be done by December. Biden won statewide by 20,000 votes. Trump has cited irregularities. The commission argued over changes to its manual that provides guidance to local election officials about how to conduct the recounts. Ultimately, they decided not to reference the manual in the order, but they did update some parts to reflect accommodations for the coronavirus pandemic. The commissioner deadlocked on making changes to the manual that Democrats and election commission staff said would bring guidance in line with the current state law. Republicans balked, saying the guidelines should not be changed after Trump filed for the recount. So basically, what's happened is hundreds of thousands of people have got around the voter ID law by saying that they're indefinitely confined, and the recount would mean that they're able to access those applications and process them and make sure they're legitimate as part of the recount process. The Democrats, understanding this means that many thousands of them will probably get thrown out because these aren't legitimate applications. They're just people who wanted to get around voter ID law, tried to change the law so that they couldn't access the applications, but they get to do it anyway. That's basically the what's going on.
This is incredible, isn't it? Because what kind of morality do you have to look at an election? And it's fair to say, right, elections are a sacred thing, right? They are part of the system. They are part of the very founding myth of the United States, democracy and so on. So you have an election. It takes place under certain rules. One party actively encourages voters to circumvent the law through a loophole. And then afterwards, you're trying to change the law retrospectively so to cover your back and to make sure no one can actually look at the loophole you've used so effectively. It's incredible. And we're talking about 250,000 people here, okay? 240,000 people. Okay, it's 10,000 short of 250,000, but whatever. 240,000 people voted without providing voter ID. This is massive, and this could potentially change the course of the election. What do you think?
Definitely. I mean, if one, the thing is, as soon as one state flips, then suddenly everyone has to start taking all the other things seriously, because they're like, well, hold on, if this was happening here, then maybe other stuff was happening in other places. But yeah, I just think it's incredible. I didn't even know this was a thing. And the reason that it might go to the Supreme Court is because there is that predicate that we talked about in a previous episode where you can't treat all law, part of the right to vote under the Constitution means not only are you enfranchised and your vote has to be treated fairly, but it means that you can't treat other votes differently to your vote. Otherwise, like if you're giving them an advantage or whatever, like you're not treating your own vote in the same way you treat theirs. That's part of your right to vote. So it seems to me that if you've got 250,000 people voting without requiring voter ID law, this is certainly something that could be challenged under that. And that comes from the Bush Gore case in 2000. That's the predicate for that. So it's very, very relevant to what's happening now. So that's why it could potentially go to the Supreme Court. I mean, of all of the things that we've spoken about so far, this to me is the most legitimate, like very clear-cut way in which the Trump campaign is going to be able to throw out a lot of these, they're fraudulent votes. If these people aren't legitimately confined, like indefinitely confined, and they've just lied to get a vote and circumvent the vote law, that's voter fraud. These are illegitimate votes.
And supported very clearly by one party. And suddenly, when you consider the wider meta context, it all seems to fit together, doesn't it? The Democrats screaming bloody murder over the ACB nomination in the Supreme Court, it suddenly makes a lot more sense because ACB is fairly well qualified. She's a good candidate, but the Democrats knew that having a 6-3 Conservative advantage, well, if they planned ahead of time, which it seems like they did, to use these legal loopholes in order to guarantee their victory in certain key swing states, and that could potentially go to the Supreme Court, that to me seems like a very long-term plan. These things, like I said before, are just too. It's just too much to be a coincidence. There is no smoke without fire, and I mean, it's just the morality of it as well. I mean, this law is clearly there to assist disabled and infirm people. It's people, the most vulnerable people in society. Wisconsin takes a law and uses that law to help them out and ensure they're franchised. And you have one of the major political parties sending hundreds of thousands of people, literally, to use that law to exploit a loophole in order to make sure they vote without providing voter ID. It's incredible. Even, no matter what happens, the Democrats have massively undermined the system here.
Yeah, and just where they've messed up as well, it's quite funny, really, is they've messed up because the law, in terms of the actual voting, doesn't say that they need to look at these applications, but the law in the recount does say that they can look at these applications. So it's almost like they forgot. It's almost like they forgot about this possibility. And then as soon as it arose, they scrambled to try and stop it, but obviously it failed because Wisconsin is split 3. I mean, imagine if this wasn't a split. Imagine if the Democrats had one more seat, then we wouldn't even be talking about this, we wouldn't even be talking about the possibility of getting this recount, which is incredible. Like, it wouldn't be happening. But yeah, I just want to say as well, just to add, I think like what you were saying, that's why they were so concerned about ACB. When you look back now at all of the stuff that was said, when you look at people like, Pelosi saying, oh, no matter what the vote tally says, Biden's going to win and all this kind of stuff. And the way that Biden's like trying to just kind of shoehorn himself into the presidency, despite the fact that Trump's not conceded, and rather than just letting the process carry out till it gets to the point where the votes are certified, he's made up this office of the president. Like he's trying to convince everyone that he is the president, so that if Trump is able to prove some of the nefarious activity that's been going on, then people are going to be like, oh, well, I don't know, I've kind of got used to the idea of Biden being president now. It seems to me that's like the plan right now, looking at it, based upon all the actions. Everything kind of is beginning to come together, like a few puzzle pieces coming together to show a bigger picture here, for me anyway.
Absolutely. And when we just look at the meta context, when we look at that create a puzzle piece, Ian, we're in the process right now where, it's the end of the election. And what happens is the apparent victor needs to gain the consent of the apparent loser to govern. Okay. And they're just not doing it. And all of these legal cases are popping up. And the Democrats either keep trying to use loopholes to get out of them, change the law quite brazenly and brashly to get out of it, or they try to move it on with their friends in the media. Okay. It says that this is incredible. If I lived in the United States and if I was a Republican, I would not be accepting the results of the election as is, not at least until every single case like this is investigated. All of the shady things, all of these loopholes, it's examined completely. Let's be honest and let's be transparent. And I don't think any Republican should feel ashamed for demanding transparency and accountability in the electoral system. But we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Again, thank you for 300 subscribers. It really meant a lot to us. We're going to be providing a lot more analysis of the post-election legal transitions, and we have a lot more exciting things planned. So do stick with us. Do subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much, and see you next time.